Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to ask some questions firstly about PFAS. So if you'd be aware that in Katherine, a water treatment plant is being installed to treat drinking water for PFAS. And in previous investigations, these steps were taken after investigation results were known. So if drinking water supply is at risk enough for a water treatment plant to be installed before the investigation results are even known, why is the department delaying the offer of blood tests to the Katherine community?
Thank you, Senator. The role of blood testing at the moment is that there is no clear value in doing blood tests outside of a situation where there's been a completed formal human health risk assessment, as it has in Williamtown and Oakey, and in the context of us doing an epidemiological study at Williamtown and Oakey. Blood testing has no predictive value, it is of no proven value, but it's being done in Williamtown and Oakey as part of the government's comprehensive study to determine if there's any evidence at all of any adverse human health effects, because there are known proven adverse human health effects. So it would be premature to offer blood testing to the Katherine residents. We haven't finished the human health assessment, we don't know the exposure pathways, and blood tests are of no predictive value to that community. Once the human health risk assessment has been completed, this could be reconsidered.
Well, what kind of research or activities are being undertaken by the department to determine?
So there is an epidemiological study, as I mentioned, that's being run by the Australian National University at Williamtown and Oakey, and that is a comprehensive study of all the disease patterns in that community.
And where's that study up to?
That study has commenced, but it's still underway. So,
how long will the study take?
So the study, Senator, Sharon Appleyard, First Assistant Secretary, Office of Health Protection. That study commenced last year and will complete in around 2020. So it started with, phase one of the study has involved a detailed literature review by the ANU in order to look at the body of evidence existing around PFAS, and that builds on work that was also done by FSANZ in developing the health-based guidance values. So that study, the literature review has just recently been delivered to the department. There is a phase 2 study protocol as well, and that is just about how and it's a limited, we call it a direct source tender. So the Australian University are being asked to come up with a study protocol, and that's going to look at how it is going to conduct the epidemiological study. So there will be interviews of the people living in the relevant areas. There will be examination of registries and databases to look at what the disease burden is in the community and whether or not there may be any link to PFAS exposure. The epidemiological study will incorporate the results of the blood tests. And so basically...
Sorry?
That phase 2. So the epidemiological study is linked to the blood testing.
The blood testing that you're not doing?
No, in Williamtown and Oakey we are doing blood testing.
Oh,
the
right.
epidemiological study is being conducted in the communities of Williamtown and Oakey.
So why not do them in Katherine?
Because, as Professor Murphy said, in Katherine at the moment a human health risk assessment has not been completed. A human health risk assessment enables us to understand what the exposure pathways are for PFAS and the extent of those exposure pathways. Once we understand those, we have a much better understanding as to whether or not there may be a need, and that would be a decision for government in relation to extending the blood testing program.
So, Senator, the other important research, government has committed $12.5 million to the NHMRC for a targeted call for research, and has appointed an independent expert panel to guide those areas of research, and that panel is also going to do yet another independent review of all of the literature to confirm the current finding as the FSANZ literature review did, that there is no consistent evidence of any adverse human health effects of PFAS at this time.
Why was William and Oakey chosen? for blood tests?
So Williamtown and Oakey were chosen because they were the first communities into which the Department of Defence had done detailed risk assessments, environmental risk assessments, human health risk assessments and ecological risk assessments. Because of those assessments, we understood, as I mentioned before, what the exposure pathways were, and that means how PFAS, the population may be being exposed to PFAS, which would generally be through food, through the groundwater or through the drinking water supply and through food. So knowing that and knowing the extent, then the decision was based on that. So that was the trigger.
Have you not done a risk assessment of Katherine?
That's in progress at the moment. But the other point, as I made before, is that the Williamtown Oakey is done in conjunction with the epidemiological survey, so the two can feed into each other.
When will the risk assessment in Katherine be completed?
So we would expect that within the next few months, Senator.
And then you'll make a determination to offer blood tests? to
So
the
that will be a
community of
decision for
Katherine?
government based on the results of the risk assessment.
So you waited until the completion of the risk assessment to offer the blood tests to Williamstown and Oakey. Is that what you're saying?
So I'm not
Is that
saying
what- 'cause
we're
that's what you
offering
just said
anything. What
before.
we're saying is that the human health risk assessment forms an important evidence base upon which it would be determined whether blood testing should be offered
No,
or
I'm
could be
talking
offered.
about Williamstown and Oakey.
Williamtown and Oakey, that's correct. The human health risk assessment had been undertaken, and based on that, it was the voluntary blood testing was actually.
Had the risk assessment been completed before you offered the blood tests?
The risk assessments were certainly underway. The blood testing,
But they weren't completed, were they?
that was happened at the time. That announcement was made at the time that this was all in the hands of the Department of Defence, Senator. So we'd have to take that on notice in terms of timing. The voluntary blood testing program and epi study have transferred to the Department of Health from the Department of Defence.
I don't understand why you don't offer the blood test to the Katherine community, considering the risk assessment is underway exactly the same as it was in Williamtown and Oakley, and that's what the community want.
But the community, there is no proven value in doing blood tests, Senator.
Then what are you afraid of?
Well, the only concern would be creating unnecessary anxiety in the community because there is no predictive value.
The anxiety's already there.
The anxiety is there, but it could be heightened. Every one of us has PFAS in our blood.